Welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. Even though I'm pretty much an expert in garment construction, or at least I think so, back in the early days of learning to work with hand-woven fabric, I found myself over-engineering garments. I wanted them to be flawless inside and out, but I chose techniques that were not in the best interest, of the hand-woven fabric. Sometimes simple is better. Don't you agree, Mulder? While I was dating my eventual husband back in the mid-1970s, my mother-in-law-to-be taught me how to spin. This is probably close to the first hand-woven garment I ever made, dating 1979 from my hand spun. And though I did line the garment, I used the same hand spun to crochet around the edges, the hem, the lower edges of the sleeve, and I created this complex rolled shawl collar also with crochet. Though it is too small to fit anyone I know now, I held on to it all these years because I did a really good job keeping it simple when I had no experience working with hand-woven fabric, let alone hand-spun. Back in the early 1980s, when I was busy selling work in craft markets, I ventured into the world of hand-woven clothing by simply cutting a slit in a shawl and crocheting around to create a neckline. I could sew up the straight sides, leaving an opening for the armhole, and crochet around the armhole edge for a tidy finish. I'm not sure why, at the time, I didn't think to also crochet the hem. Maybe a customer might want it shortened. And in the case of this dress, which is a different version, I crocheted the side seams together as well. I made many of these garments, lacing a twist ply rope through the waist, and sold them as simple drapey tops and the occasional dress. They were woven in a loom-controlled dupe Leno lace weave, and I kept that seam finish in the back of my head for many years. I've made a few pieces since then. We're having fussy facings and hems, or interfacing and underlining, just didn't give me the simple, unfussy look I wanted. This is especially true when working with a cloth that will reverse to the wrong side while being worn, as in the case of this hooded wrap coat. And this floppy collared sweater jacket. This hand-woven rayon and metallic top needed to be kept simple. No facings, just the cloth and an edge finish. Crochet made a lot of sense in this case. I did actually crochet the lower edge instead of turning up a hem. I found this simple top in the archives, hand-woven cotton, though not by me, over-dyed with a mitered front and back. To keep the construction simple, I just crocheted around the edges. More recently, at the beginning of when we all had to quarantine for COVID, I wanted a replacement for my favorite slouchy sweater jacket that I wore every day around the house, but I didn't want the fussiness of a jacket with a collar, a band, hems, the whole drill. Crochet to the rescue. There is the assumption at this point that you sort of need to know how to crochet in order to be able to do a nice, tidy crocheted edge around a garment. If you are a hand weaver, this shouldn't be difficult to pick up if you don't know how to crochet. Practice, as in all things, is essential. What I'd like to talk about first, though, is how to secure the edges of something you have cut into so you can successfully crochet around the perimeter of a garment. To stabilize an edge, there are a few options. One, of course, is a serger. We talked about sergers in a previous video. The most important thing to remember is to make sure you don't stretch out the edge. Serging in the direction of the grain, disregarding which face of the fabric is up, is really, really important. You'll be covering the serging anyway with the crochet, so if the fabric has to be wrong side up in order to be able to stitch from the widest point to the narrowest point in the direction of the grain, then do that. I've created some samples with a white wool and contrasting thread so you can see more clearly in the video. Here is a 4-thread overlock or serged edge. I've dropped one of the needles and done a 3-thread overlock. And here I just used a machine overcast stitch I found on my Janome sewing machine. All of these secure the edge and give a template or guide for keeping the crochet stitches even. If you don't have a serger, my trusty staple, bias cut nylon tricot, can work very well here. It's actually my go-to finish. I did a whole video on using bias cut nylon tricot as a seam finish. Here, I'm using it as an edge finish. You'll want to just cover 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters of the edge. Again, it supports the edge, keeps any little ravelly bits from poking through the crochet, and gives a nice template or guide for the crochet stitches. You can use a color of the nylon tricot that matches close to the ground fabric or close to the yarn you'll be crocheting with. If you only have access to a straight stitch machine, 2 rows of support stitching along the edge can do the job. The first row would be 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from the cut edge. The second row would be close to the cut edge. Again, the critical part here is to stitch with the grain. That would be widest to narrowest and highest to lowest to prevent any distortion of the cut edge. We talked about stitching with the grain in a number of videos. As best I can tell, because I certainly don't remember, I did a narrow zigzag to hold the edge securely for the crocheted stitches for the drapey top. For this little Madras cotton top, which I made with my 900 bias top pattern, I turned under the edge of the neckline, armhole, and lower edge of the garment a scant 1/4 inch or 5 millimeters and stitched to secure. That allowed me to do a single crochet around, followed by a graduated scalloped edge. For the rayon and metallic top, I used the bias cut nylon tricot as an edge finish so I could use it as a guide for the crochet. I used the same technique on this little cotton top and on this sweater jacket. The perimeter edges are all trimmed with a brown bias cut nylon tricot. And this mohair wrap coat was serged first on all the edges before a crocheted finish was added. Occasionally, you will have a fabric that is a bit fragile. I use a narrow strip of crosswise cut fusible tricot interfacing to first stabilize the edge and then use one of the recommended bases, serging, bias cut, tricot, overcast machine stitch, and whatever. And now, the hook. This is my favorite. It is from Clover, feels really good in the hand, has a cover to protect the point, and is a size 0 or 1.75 millimeter. You'll need a hook that is slim and pointy enough to pierce your fabric. Crochet stitches can be simple or complicated depending on your skill level. Here I'll demonstrate a simple single crochet. You will have a loop on the hook from the previous stitch. Work from the right if you are right-handed. Mirror everything if you are left-handed. Insert the hook into the fabric close enough to the previous stitch to mostly cover the base, but not so close that you cause the edge to ripple. Reach back with the hook and grab the yarn from behind, bringing a loop to the front. Now you have 2 loops on the hook. Wrap the hook around the yarn again and pull that loop through the 2 on the hook. Learning to feed the yarn over the left fingers can be a bit of a challenge, but practice makes you consistent. On my sweater jacket, I did a single crochet around the perimeter of the garment and then went back a second time with a slip stitch. I went through the pair of small loops at the top of each single crochet with the hook and pulled a loop up and directly through the loop already on the hook. It gave me a sturdier edge and a more interesting finish. This sample, I did a double crochet. There are plenty of online tutorials for many of these stitches. My favorite of all the stitches as an edge finish is the reverse single crochet or crab stitch. It's actually a single crochet done in the reverse direction. You can see it here on the edges of the mohair wrap coat and on the edges of the rayon metallic top. Instead of working right to left for those who are right-handed, work left to right, which means the loop you bring up wraps around the edge of the fabric in this lovely edge finish. Don't be afraid to use the crocheted edge for a seam finish. In the case of the sweater jacket, I crocheted one of the side seam cut edges and used a bias tricot on the other and just overlapped them. You could use a crocheted seam finish on both sides, butt them together with a crocheted slip stitch for a really lovely finish. Or stitch the seam, bringing the seam allowances to the right side of the fabric, finish off with one of the bases we discussed, like a serged edge, and crochet the seam allowances as one. Use a needle and thread to secure the crocheted seam finish flat, or leave them floating on the fabric. In the case of the mohair coat, because the fabric was so lofty, I serged the cut edges of the seam allowances and actually used a tapestry needle and mohair yarn to cover the serging with a blanket stitch, grabbing a bit of the outer fabric so the seams would lay open and flat. We didn't talk about what yarn to use because chances are one of the yarns you wove with would work well. And if your yarns were very fine, double them. I do sample many yarn options and stitches on scrap hand woven from the project before settling on the one I think works best. Keep it simple. Sometimes all you need is a good right hook or left. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.